43. The time for member statements has concluded. Questions without notice. The Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you. My question is to the Prime Minister. In July, the government suffered a primary swing in Braddon of 2% and in Longman it was 9%. Then it deposed Malcolm Turnbull. But on the weekend, the government suffered a 19% swing in Wentworth. So given the government's disastrous performance in Wentworth, why has Malcolm Turnbull gone, but you're still here?
Prime Minister has the call.
Mr. Speaker, you know, the people have suggested that Labor were running dead in the Wentworth by-election. But the real proof of that would have been whether the Leader of the Opposition turned up in Wentworth, Mr. Speaker. Then we would have really known that they were running dead in Wentworth.
Members on my left.
Up, because that would have suppressed the vote even more, Mr. Speaker. That would have absolutely tanked the vote. Now, it is true. It is true that around a third of the Liberal Party vote in Wentworth, Mr. Speaker, was lost to the Liberal Party in that Wentworth by-election. It is also true that a third of the Labor Party vote was lost in the Wentworth by-election. A third of the Greens vote were lost in that by-election, Mr. Speaker. Now, as I said on the weekend, am very, very happy to stand up as Leader of the Liberal Party and cop it on the chin, Mr. Speaker, for the anger that was expressed by Liberal voters, in particular, about the events of 2 months ago. And we said that, and we were honest with our supporters and followers about that on the weekend, and we have committed to them to ensure that as we have continued to come together, unified as a party, to go forward and fight this Labor leader who wants to put more than $200 billion worth of taxes on Australians, who wants to see a resurgence in militant unionism in this country, who wants to put their electricity prices up with reckless policies, and we will fight this Leader of the Labor Party all the way until the bell rings, and we will be successful.
The member for Clare.
To the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House the significance of yesterday's national apology to the victims and survivors of institutional child sexual abuse? How is the government acting on the recommendations of the Royal Commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse to give practical meaning to this apology?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Clare for his question on this very important issue, and I want to thank all those survivors who attended here yesterday, not just in this building but outside of this place and on the lawns where we had the opportunity to meet and listen to their stories, and as they came back into this parliament and into the offices of members and they recounted their stories. And I want to thank all members of this chamber for the welcome that they provided to all of those survivors, and all Australians for their solidarity and standing by those survivors and their families. It was a very, very moving day. But an apology without action, as we said yesterday, is just a piece of paper, and the concrete actions that are necessary are about implementing the recommendations of the Royal Commission. 108 of those 122 recommendations are being implemented. They were ones directed towards the Commonwealth, and 18 further recommendations are being worked through with the states and territories. The National Redress Scheme has commenced. The National Office of Child Safety was stood up in July, and now, as I said yesterday, it will report directly to me, not just to the Department of Social Services, and I'll be assisted in that role, not only by the Minister for Social Services but by the Assistant Minister to the Prime Minister, who has done an outstanding job in working with the advisory group and working towards the national apology yesterday. And I want to add my thanks to my assistant minister. The national database to ensure higher standards for child protection is underway, working with states and territories. The work with survivors who are anxious about going into institutional aged care as a result of their most horrific experiences when they were last in institutions is an important issue that has been raised, and is one that we'll be working closely with the Minister for Aged Care and Minister for Senior Australians, but also be looking to the Royal Commission into aged care that we have announced to be sensitive to that issue and the solutions that need to be made available. We are establishing the National Centre for Excellence to raise awareness and understanding of the impacts of child sexual abuse and removing the stigma so the stories can be told and so the understanding can be generated. The National Museum, which we announced support for, which will be working with survivors in particular So the stories can be told, and we will never turn our back again on the shame that is rightfully sitting across our country, a stain on our country. And that National Museum will be a place for reflection, for learning, for understanding. And I would add to that that it will draw on excellent proposals from the care leaders who have got a particular proposal relating to an old orphanage building. And whether it's that proposal, that's what inspired this idea for this museum, and I want to thank the Clan representatives for bringing that forward. There were many people yesterday who I know felt they weren't recognised, and I particularly also want to recognise, if I can have indulgence on this one point, to recognise those in our Defence Forces who also suffered sexual abuse. I want to acknowledge them here today, and I particularly want to thank the member for Dunkley for bringing that to my attention, and I want to particularly in this place acknowledge their suffering as well.
And the Leader of the Opposition on indulgence as well.
Yes, I seek to rise to associate myself with the remarks of the Prime Minister. It was a very emotional day, as the Prime Minister and I discussed in the Great Hall, the level of emotion and hurt and all of the conflicting emotions was almost physical. You could almost feel it against your skin. We appreciate the attendance of all the survivors and victims and all those who came to hear it. That was a very big compliment these people paid to this parliament, having been let down by institutions and people in power their whole lives. To come here and to trust us to apologise, at the very least, was remarkable. We acknowledge too that too many people didn't survive or weren't able to be there yesterday. We can also acknowledge that action, not words, is what people want, and we promise not to second-guess the Royal Commission. It's a global standard. It's the best set of recommendations, the best set of proposals, and I understand, especially for those who are dying and very ill at the moment, we need to do everything to speed up redress.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And just before my question, can I add my words of support to acknowledging what an important day yesterday was. My question is to the Prime Minister. On Sky News this morning, when asked why Malcolm Turnbull was no longer Prime Minister, the Minister for Defence Industry said it was because Malcolm Turnbull couldn't sell the government's message.
That's a bit harsh.
Is this why the government deposed Malcolm Turnbull and installed the advertising guy as Prime Minister? And given the government's disastrous performance on the weekend, how does he think the Muppet Show's going?
The Prime Minister has the chair.
The Leader of the Labor Party and the Deputy Leader of the Labor Party seem completely obsessed with the bubble of politics in Canberra. This is where they reside on a daily basis. It's been 8 weeks now, and all they can ask questions about is politics, Mr Speaker. But I'll remind them of what we've been doing once again in the last 8 weeks, and that is to conclude the negotiations on the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement with Indonesia, to establish the Royal Commission into aged care quality and safety, keeping older Australians safe, touring the drought areas and announcing the decision to reduce the red tape for truckies carting hay, to increase the payments that we've made available for farm household assistance, to start construction on Sydney's second airport, 50 years of talk now over and the project underway, providing more choice for Australian parents with more funding for non-government schools, moving quickly to establish tougher penalties for food tamperers, Mr Speaker, legislating a fairer and more sustainable way to distribute the GST, cutting taxes for small and family businesses, accelerating those tax cuts to 25% as those opposite had to be dragged kicking and screaming to do it, Mr Speaker, tackling farm labour shortages, ensuring, Mr Speaker, that we're focused on the issues that Australians are, and today we have announced further measures to ensure that we will be taking the electricity prices of Australians down by putting in place the measures that take the big energy companies to task and put in place the big stick, put in place the price guarantees, Mr Speaker, which ensure that Australians can pay less for their electricity, as opposed to paying more and more and more under Labor.
The member for Morrison.
Mr Speaker, there is no surprise that Labor Party only wants to talk about politics. because they have no plans for the future. They want Australians to pay more for everything, higher taxes, higher electricity bills, more for their private health insurance, Mr Speaker. These are the issues that Australians are focused on. These are the issues our government is focused on. The leader of the Labor Party is just another politician trapped in the Canberra bubble.
Before I call the member for Robertson, the member for Wakefield can not display his book. Yeah. Member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and my question is to the Prime Minister. Will the Prime Minister outline to the House how the government is acting to build a stronger economy so that Australian families earn more and live better? Is the Prime Minister aware of any threats posed by alternative proposals?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Robertson for her question. We're doing this because we're taking action on reducing electricity prices by getting the big energy companies under control. They're the measures we've announced today. They're the measures that the Minister for getting electricity prices down and I have announced today, and the member for Hume, to provide a price safety net which will end the loyalty tax which big electricity companies have been putting on their loyal customers for doing nothing other than just staying with the same company, Mr Speaker. And under the measures that we have announced today, the loyalty tax will go from electricity companies and the price safety net is underway and will be delivered to the Australian people. The big stick to ensure that electricity companies, the big electricity companies, are taken into line will be legislated, and the legislation will come into this parliament before the end of the year to ensure that they must pass on the savings they're seeing through the wholesale prices, that the gouging must stop. And these powers will range from everything from enforceable undertakings to divestment powers against these big energy companies so they do the right thing. And the big energy companies know, Mr Speaker, that I don't bluff on this or anything else, Mr Speaker, and we are bringing in those rules and we expect them to do the right thing by their customers and bring those electricity prices down. And we're backing in investment in fair income, real power generation on the East Coast that is needed to ensure that the lights stay on and we don't see the fast that we saw in South Australia under Labor's failed energy policies, which switched off the lights, Mr Speaker, but under our policies getting more reliable energy into the system is what is needed, extra generation, putting more competition into the market and delivering lower electricity prices. Now, we are doing all of this while meeting the targets that we have set for ourselves in a canter. We have smashed Kyoto 1, we will meet Kyoto 2 and we will meet the commitments that we have made out to 2030. But the Labor Party has another plan. The Labor Party has a plan to have an emissions reduction target of 45%, which will put an increase in the cost on every power bill in this country greater than the carbon tax they legislated, they said they'd never introduce when they were last in government. They have a plan for higher taxes, and that includes higher charges on electricity as a result of the reckless policies that they would pursue. Under Labor, you will pay more. You'll pay more in tax. You'll pay more for your electricity prices. More than $200 billion in higher taxes, which slows the economy, takes jobs away from Australians and ensures that they do not earn more because they'll only be taxed more.
The member for McMahon.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. A week before the Wentworth by-election, the Prime Minister warned that a hung parliament would cause, and I quote,
the member for
uncertainty.
McMahon will just pause for a second. The Leader of the House will not interject. I'm not going to keep doing this every day. The member for McMahon can begin his question again.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. A week before the Wentworth by-election, the Prime Minister warned that a hung parliament would cause, and I quote, uncertainty in our economy. Does the Prime Minister stand by this statement? If not, why does the Prime Minister always say one thing before an election and something completely different after the election?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, the Shadow Treasurer may not be aware that following the weekend's results, the ANZ Consumer Confidence Index actually fell over the course of the weekend, and the ANZ economists attributed that result to the uncertainty that resulted from the election result.
Members on my left.
So, Mr Speaker, the comments I made last week, Mr Speaker, I simply observe that the outcome and uncertainty of the event of the election on the weekend did produce Mr Speaker, it did produce the result that I indicated that it would. Now, that said, the government that we have been part of, and particularly over the last 8 weeks, we have effectively been in the position of a minority government ever since that time. And in that time, we've worked constructively with those on the crossbench to deal with legislation, to get measures through. We've passed small business tax cuts, Mr Speaker. We've passed important legislation to protect our strawberry farmers. We've passed legislation every single day we have been in here, and we have been getting on with the job of government. Now, we will continue to do that. The business as usual of our government of getting things done will continue, and that business as usual means more jobs, it means lower taxes, it means lower electricity prices, it means ensuring that we pay for affordable medicines, it means retaining our AAA credit rating, it means a stronger economy that guarantees the essential services that Australians rely on. That's what we're getting on with. The Leader of the Labor Party is stuck in the Canberra bubble.
It's the independence question. The members on both sides, the Leader of the House will cease interjecting. The member for Kennedy has the call.
Health Minister, data just revealed shows Cape York, Torres Straits, Gulf region in 4 years, 72 deaths attributable to diabetes. Since advanced diabetes cases moved to the coast, and since malnutrition causes diabetes and other terminal illnesses, Minister, you would agree that each year 60 people are dying that simply don't have to die. Will you reverse government decisions that closed the Mission market gardens, ban the islanders' backyard fruit and veggies, and de facto abolished dinghy fishing?
The Minister for Health.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Kennedy for his important and wide-ranging question. I was only today discussing the issue of Indigenous diabetes with his neighbour and my very good friend, the member for Leichhardt, who shares an equal passion on this topic and on this issue. We know that Indigenous diabetes incidence for over 18s is, I think, about 11% or about triple the national average. For the 10 to 14-year-olds, it's at 8 times the national average. So the points that he makes are fundamentally correct and significant. In terms of what we're doing, specifically for Indigenous communities, we're allocating about $207 million to the Integrated Team Care program for Indigenous Australians, with a very specific focus on diabetes treatment, diagnosis and ensuring that people have the best long-term pathway. The other thing we have is a $67 million program for chronic disease within Indigenous communities, which has the capacity to do much more on-country rather than, as the member says, just on the coast. So I think there's a very significant pathway to expand and extend that program onto Indigenous land, to the actual communities themselves. In addition to that, at the broader national level, which can also apply very specifically to Indigenous communities, the National Diabetes Support Scheme is an over $200 million program this year alone. And as well, we've just extended continuous glucose monitoring by $54 million. All of those things come together. But I think we can do more for Indigenous diabetes, both in terms of prevention as well as treatment. In terms of the prevention, I want to invite the member to work with me and Indigenous communities and other members in this House who represent large Indigenous communities.
The Minister for Health will resume his seat. The member for Kennedy on a point of order.
Point of order. I asked about fresh fruit and vegetables. I've great respect for the minister, but I really would like him to focus on the problem, which is fresh fruit and vegetables. The
minister has the call.
So in terms of the preventive agenda, part of that is what people eat. I note that the member mentions the Mission Gardens. My understanding is that that was a Queensland government decision to abolish those mission gardens. But I will write today to the Premier of Queensland to ask her to reverse that decision of the Queensland government, and I will write today, and I will share a copy with the member in relation to other matters. We will work together to encourage more homegrown produce, and any barriers we will deal with that. I'm not aware that there was any federal government decision in relation to that, but I'm always happy to examine it. And in relation to dinghy fishing, again, I'm not aware of any ban. That would fall squarely within my colleague, the Minister for Agriculture's area, and I will make a representation to him the moment I sit down next to him.
The member for Bennelong.
Speaker, my question is to the Treasurer. Will the Treasurer update the House on how the government's strong economic management is reducing the tax burden on retirees, families and small businesses so they can earn more and live better? Is the Treasurer aware of any alternative policies?
The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And he's a great champion for the people of Bennelong, having dispatched with Senator Keneally in straight sets, Mr Speaker. And we remember that fondly. Now, Mr Speaker, the people of Bennelong are benefiting greatly from a strong economy, an economy that is growing by 3.4% through the year, an economy that has seen more than 1 million new jobs being created. That last week we saw unemployment fall to 5%, the lowest level in 6 years, Mr Speaker. An economy with a AAA credit rating from all three agencies. An economy where the budget is coming back to balance a year earlier than expected, with the smallest deficit in a decade. And today, Mr Speaker, we welcome the Labor Party following our lead in supporting reform to the GST, Mr Speaker, because the people of Western Australia, and indeed all states and territories, will be better off as a result of our reform. So we thank the Labor Party for belatedly coming to the table, Mr Speaker. But the biggest risk to the Australian economy comes from a Labor Party that is determined to see Australians earn less and pay more. Earn less and pay more. Because we have a deputy leader who, for her, aspiration is a mystery, Mr Speaker. We have a leader of the opposition who wants to run the Australian economy like a union and to give the CFMEU a seat at the top table in Cabinet, Mr Speaker. And the member for Lilly, the incoming president of the Labor Party, who wants to tear down neoliberalism. But the problem is, for the member for Lilly, those who know him best, like the former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, said he could never mount a logical argument, Mr Speaker. So there is major problems on those sides. But the biggest problem is going to be the $200 billion of new taxes, increasing the taxes on your income, increasing taxes on your property with changes to negative gearing and capital gains, increasing taxes on family businesses with the changes to trusts, Mr Speaker, increasing taxes on your electricity. But the most punitive change of all is the retirees tax, Mr Speaker. The retirees tax. In the member for Bennelong, there are more than 8,000 people who have excess franking credits who will pay more as a result of Labor's policy. In the member for Jagga seat, there are 7,900 who will be worse off. In the member for Hindmarsh's seat, there are 7,200 who will be worse off. In the member for Newcastle, in the member for Bendigo, in the member for Eden Monaro's seat, Mr Speaker, there will be 7,000 people who are worse off.
The
Only under the coalition
has concluded. A member for Longman.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm reports that he's asked Malcolm Turnbull to come out of retirement to represent the Australian government at an international summit on oceans this week?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for her question. Mr Turnbull will lead the Australian delegation at the next Our Ocean Conference in Bali on the 29th to the 30th of October of 2018. He was personally invited to attend that originally by the Indonesian President. It was the subject of our discussions
Members on my left.
when I met with the Indonesian President, President Widodo, and I was unable to follow through on that invitation. And so, to ensure that we had very senior level representation, which was well received by the President of Indonesia, I did request the former Prime Minister to represent us at that conference, and he'll be there representing the policies of our government. And, Mr Speaker, in that capacity, I think he presents a very serious, a very senior and a very duly recognised status of our relationship with Indonesia, and I know that his attendance at that summit will be well recognised and appreciated by President Widodo, and I thank him for representing Australia on that occasion.
The member for Lyde.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. Would the Deputy Prime Minister update the House on how a stronger economy is supporting rural and regional Australia and putting downward pressure on power prices? What at risk for rural and regional Australia from alternative proposals?
The Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Lyne for his question. And as we all know on this side, that a strong economy helps us invest in what is important, not these inside the Canberra bubble games that those opposite ask about and those games that they play, but what's important. We on this side of the House know what's important, and it helps us put downward pressure on power prices. It helps us put the big stick of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission onto ensuring that Australians have a default power price so we can help power prices come down. Default price, more investment in the sector and indeed divestiture powers, affordability and reliability in the sector. Those opposite, well, they stand for 45% emissions, they stand for 50% renewables, they stand for smashing manufacturing, for smashing farmers, for smashing families, for making sure that every time people flick the switch, well, not every time, because we saw the great South Australian experiment when South Australians turned on the switch and, quite frankly, the power didn't come on. But we're taking action. We're getting people's power bills down. And at the moment, people worry about getting the bill. They certainly worry about getting the bill. They do. We know that small business, that families, that farmers need confidence, and we're working to deliver just that. We're doing that by running a strong economy. We're doing that by supporting small businesses. We're doing that by supporting those people who help create jobs, those small and family medium enterprises and big business too, because they have helped create 1 million jobs in 5 years. We said we'd do that. We said we'd get the economic parameters right, and we did, and business responded by employing people, 1 million Australians. And we're helping by taking a practical approach to energy, certainly in regional Australia, and certainly for farmers, such as dairy farmers. In the member who asked the question, the member for Lyme, he knows how important dairy farmers are to agriculture. When agriculture is strong, so too is regional Australia. When regional Australia is strong, so too is our nation. Now, taking on action on power prices also helps our farmers, our small businesses, businesses such as Valley Industries in Taree, in the member for Lyne's electorate. Now, it's a non-profit organisation. It has several businesses in the Manning Valley, including a commercial laundry.
Member for Wakefield.
It has 350 local employees, many of whom have a disability. Many of whom have a disability, and they rely on that particular business. They enjoy going to work, they look forward to it, and they're doing a power of good for their local community and indeed the local economy, and through it the nation. It's providing tremendous opportunities for those locally. But a commercial laundry requires a lot of power, and at the moment that costs a lot of money. So we're going to make it easier for them. We are making it easier for them, and certainly all our policies will continue to do that in the future. But what does Labor stand for? Well, more taxes on your property, on your income, on your business, on your savings, and on your electricity bill. That's right.
The member for Isaacs.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. In question time, the Prime Minister told the House, and I quote, "I came to this position of leadership not seeking it, in support of the previous Prime Minister." Does he stand by that answer, given the member for Warringah has told journalist David Spears that the now Prime Minister, quote, "parlayed his half a dozen votes into the Prime Ministership, manoeuvring to bring on the spill and to then harvest Turnbull votes to get the top job"? Is the reason why the Prime Minister won't explain why Malcolm Turnbull was deposed because he was up to his neck in it?
The member's time has concluded. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, clearly the Prime Minister is not responsible for the comments of any other member in this parliament, including the member for Warringah. It's not within his responsibilities.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. The question begins by quoting what the Prime Minister said in question time. The information that was provided later in the question goes to contradict that directly. We're asking whether he stands by it.
No, the Manager of Opposition Business can resume his seat. I'm going to refer members to my earlier rulings and to a very similar question. It offends another part of my earlier ruling, and it regrets to me. It's a regret that it's the member for Isaacs again, I have to say, and that is that the majority of the question was out of order. I've made that point very clear. The Prime Minister is not responsible for the comments of other members who aren't ministers, and I've said I'm not simply going to allow a tagline just with a reference to open it up to any sort of question and any sort of dialogue that is out of order. The majority of that question is out of order, and I think anyone drafting it would have known it. I'll hear the Manager of Opposition Business again.
Given that the Prime Minister made the comment that we referred to at the beginning of the question, I came to this position of leadership not seeking it. How can we test whether he stands by that without putting quotations that directly contradict it to him?
Well, I think you can think about that while we go to the next question and see if you can frame it better. The member for Brisbane.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy. Will the Minister update the House on how our government's plan for affordable, reliable power is helping to drive down energy prices? And is the Minister aware of any alternative approaches that could drive up power prices for families and small businesses?
The Minister for Energy.
Well, I thank the member for Brisbane for his question. He fights every day for the families and small businesses in his electorate. And they are families and small businesses, like all families and small businesses around Australia, who will benefit from this government's plan for reliable, affordable electricity, a plan announced by the Prime Minister this morning. Now, our plan is focused on reducing prices while we keep the lights on, and that means stopping the price gouging by the big energy companies. It means setting a fair price safety net to be in place by the 1st of July with a down payment by the 1st of January. It means backing new investment in reliable generation with a short list of projects by early next year. And it requires energy companies to invest in fair dinkum reliable generation at least 3 years ahead to meet customer needs, and that will be in place by the 1st of July next year. Mr Speaker, for too long, customers have taken a back seat to corporate greed and dodgy market practices. Well, we're banning the sneaky late payments. We're getting rid of the loyalty tax. In South East Queensland, in the member's electorate, households can save $370 or more by shopping around. That's why the price safety net is so important, but not everybody has the time to shop around. So we need this important reform for every customer in the market. Now, later this year, we'll introduce a big stick legislative package into this parliament. A big stick legislative package into the parliament, and that will include divestment and other powers for the Treasurer and for the ACCC. Now, the member asked about an alternative.
Member for Hunter.
Well, there is an alternative because we have seen it before. Their plan, those opposite, their plan is a 45% emissions reduction target and a 50% RET, and it will require a huge tax on every energy consumer, greater than their previous carbon tax. It'll drive up prices just like in Labor's experiment in South Australia. As I saw last week when I was in Blackwood in South Australia with the member for Boothby, where we saw amongst the highest electricity prices in the world and the highest electricity prices in Australia, an experiment from a Labor government. Those opposite just don't get it, Mr Speaker. Labor is busy second-guessing technologies
decades from now, we're focused on getting prices down.
Member for Scullin. Member for Whitlam. The member for Hotham has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Journalist David Spears has revealed the now Prime Minister's numbers men, who were recently rewarded with promotions to Assistant Treasurer and Special Minister of State, conspired to depose Malcolm Turnbull. Given this revelation, how can the Prime Minister stand by his previous statement in question time that he didn't seek to become Prime Minister?
The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, other people's speculation, hypotheticals, imputations are not the responsibilities of the Prime Minister, and therefore is not responsible for answering what either a journalist or a member of Parliament says is their particular opinion about events of the past. These are not matters within the responsibility of the Prime Minister.
The Manager of Opposition Business.
To the point of order, the Prime Minister chose to put on the record in this House that he believes he has clean hands. If there's evidence challenging his statement, we should be allowed to ask about it.
The Leader of the Opposition is not assisting. Again, I think that question. Member for Wakefield. Member for Wakefield. I don't know what you said, but it really matters. You can leave under 94A. Yeah, you leave. Yeah. I just remind him that the hour's a minimum. And stay out longer if he wishes. I still think that question does offend the point I've made about introducing a whole range of material. I'm not going to write the questions for the opposition, but clearly, if a question is tighter, it's got a much greater chance of being in order. The member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Jobs, Industrial Relations and Women. Will the Minister update the House on how the government is helping to support small and family businesses so they earn more and live better? What risks do alternative approaches pose to this vital part of Australia's economy?
The Minister for Industrial Relations, Jobs and Women.
I thank the member for North Sydney for his question, and like he and everybody else on this side, he is backing small and family-sized businesses because he, like everybody here, supports tax cuts for those small and family-sized businesses, including the 31,000 small and family businesses in his electorate and the more than 3 million small businesses right across this country. We know how important these businesses are to our national economy, as the member rightly notes. We know it because we know that these small businesses create once every 100 seconds in this country, creating an opportunity for themselves and for the many people that they employ. There are so many people putting their energy, their capital and their hard work into creating their own economic opportunity. But I am sad to say to the member for North Sydney that they do face threats, and they face threats from those opposite, because those opposite see small and family-sized businesses, including the 7 million people that they employ, as simply second-class citizens in this country. If it is a choice between militant union bosses and small and family-sized businesses, they will choose militant union bosses every time. If it's a choice between John Setka and a small business person, they will choose John Setka every time. And they will back the ACTU and John Setka's plan to rip up the rules when it comes to workplaces right across this country. And of course, it will have devastating consequences. We saw it in December last year when there were illegal blockades of the Victorian International Container Terminal. And we saw that these militant bosses stopped the exports like fruit and milk products straight from our nation's hard-working farmers. We saw them have this produce left rotting on the containers and on the shores. And today we have seen unions, militant union bosses, shut down our nation's cities. According to the industry groups who have done calculations on this will be a loss to productivity of around $250 million. And those opposite, of course, will cheer them on every step of the way because they want industrial sector-wide action, industry pattern-wide bargaining to become the new norm. They are anti-small business. They will shut down our ports, leaving small businesses without the stock that they need for Christmas. They will let the unions shut down construction sites, delaying the delivery of $1 billion of infrastructure projects, and they will shut down our schools if they are given a chance. Those opposite would have the law breakers become the law makers, and we would all pay a heavy price for that.
The Manager of Opposition Business has the call.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Given the evidence that his key supporters conspired to depose Malcolm Turnbull, how can the Prime Minister stand by his statement to the House, and I quote, "I came to this position of leadership not seeking it in support of the previous Prime Minister"?
No, I'm going to allow that question. The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I absolutely stand by my comments in this House, Mr Speaker. I absolutely stand by my comments in this House, and I'm not going to take a lecture from a leader of the Labor Party who cut down 2 Prime Ministers. One was here yesterday, the other one was here today.
Members on my left.
He cut down 2. There's no dispute about that, Mr Speaker. I've supported Prime Ministers in this place, Mr Speaker. That's my record. But what I have noticed—
Members on my left.
What I have noticed about the Labor Party today, as they have obsessed about politics, Mr Speaker, what we see in their smirks and in their sneers and in their jeers and in the swagger that we also see from militant unions, Mr Speaker, is a cockiness that has crept in to this Leader of the Labor Party, an arrogance, a smarminess, Mr Speaker, which has crept into this Leader of the Labor Party. This Leader of the Labor Party thinks he's already there. They all think they're already there, Mr Speaker, from the weeping member for Rankin, Mr Speaker, to all of them over here, all of them here. They know, Mr Speaker, they know that they should not be treating the Australian people with such contempt in the way they behave in this place, with their sneering and their jeering and their swaggering. And you know what happens when the Labor Party gets more cocky? The unions get more cocky, Mr Speaker. The cockier the Labor Party get, the cockier the unions get. And that's what we're seeing on the streets of Melbourne today. That's what we'll see around the country if this Leader of the Labor Party gets to run this country like a union, like he said he would, Mr Speaker. Now, our government is about ensuring a stronger economy and even a stronger Australia that can guarantee the essential services that Australians rely on. What we're focused on is lower electricity prices. What we're focused on is lower taxes, and we're delivering lower taxes. We're backing small and family businesses. That's our record. We're focused on issues like the drought and ensuring that this Friday, when we come together as a nation to ensure that we are focused on a coordinated response to the drought, to ensure that we don't just provide the relief, that we provide the recovery and we provide the resilience for the future. That's what our government is focused on. This cocky, swaggering Leader of the Labor Party thinks he's already got his hands on the prize, and that's all he's ever wanted.
The member for Menzies.
Mr Speaker, I asked the Minister for Home Affairs if he would update the House on the importance of robust border protection measures for Australia, and secondly, is he aware of any different ideas that would undermine those measures?
The Minister for Home Affairs has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for his question. Mr Speaker, I want to inform the House, and this is based on advice from our Operation Sovereign Border Agency heads, that is that the threat of people smuggling has certainly not gone away. There are ventures that we know of that are being attempted at the moment to be put together in Indonesia and elsewhere. We're worried about activity and intelligence coming out from certain parts of the region. We're seeing what's happening in the Mediterranean, Mr Speaker, where already something like 2,000 people have drowned at sea this year. So, Mr Speaker, the resolve of the government in relation to keeping our borders secure has not diminished and will not diminish. We know that we had a big mess to clean up when Labor left office. There were 8,000 children that they had put into detention, and 50,000 people, Mr Speaker, arrived on 800 boats. Tragically, in our own region, 1,200 people drowned at sea. I've not had a drowning at sea, Mr Speaker, since my time in the portfolio. We've got all of the children out of detention in Australia, and we've removed 1,150 people from Manus and Nauru. We're down to 52 children on Nauru, and we want to get it to 0, but we have to be sensible about the way that we do it, Mr Speaker. Now, I know that the Labor Party has written to the government in the last 24 hours requesting that, and this is their second position in just 2 weeks, so like they did when Mr Rudd and Ms Gillard were in charge of the Labor Party, they are in panic mode in relation to border protection policy right now, and the letter goes along these lines, Mr Speaker. Labor asks that you consider the following amendments to the legislation: guaranteed acceptance of New Zealand's offer and the removal of all children and their families from Nauru to New Zealand. Let me say this, Mr Speaker. There are 13 children on Nauru at the moment that are involved in family groups that are the subject, they're adults, mostly males within that family unit, are the subject of adverse security assessments from the United States. Now, the first question, Mr Speaker, is New Zealand going to take those people where the United States has advised that that person, that individual in the family unit, is a risk to national security? Is the Labor Party suggesting that Australia should take those males and bring them to our country? Is that what they're suggesting? Are they suggesting that we should separate the children from the parents, leave the parents in Nauru but bring the children here? Mr Speaker, the issue is the government is dealing with this. We are getting children off Manus. We've done all of that. We've got all of the children that Labor put off Manus. We've got many of the children off Nauru that Labor put on Nauru, but we are not doing it in a way that would see boats restart. And the Labor Party, if they had a boat arrive tomorrow, it's the policy of the Labor Party that every one of those children would go to Nauru.
Has concluded. The member for Cowan has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Environment Minister. Last week, the minister managed to insult all of Australia's Pacific neighbours at the same time, as twice misleading the parliament. Does this minister take any responsibility for her stumbles and for the role she played in the government's devastating performance on the weekend?
That question is just in order. The minister has the call. Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Cowan for her question. As I said in the House last week, and I've repeated numerous times, I did not mislead Parliament. I did not. I'm asked a question. I'm now responding to the member for Cowan. I did not mislead Parliament, and the way that the conversation was reported in the media was inaccurate. It was inaccurate. But the question, Mr Speaker, you have to ask yourself is why does the Labor Party continue with this line of questioning? Why do they do that? It's because it's a distraction. You know that we on this side have actually got the economy humming. You know that the Australians are watching us and that they know that we have everything under control from an economy perspective. We've heard from the Treasurer today. We know about all the fabulous things that are going on in our economy. We know. That's right. There's a here. That's so good. So what have we got? We now know since 2013 we've now created 1 million jobs. That's something to celebrate. Australians also know that we've got the unemployment rate down to 5%. They're pretty happy about that too, Prime Minister.
Gossip in restaurants.
They know that we're looking after the small to medium-sized businesses and we've cut their taxes. They also know that we've now got a very sensible GST solution, and I would have thought the member for Cowan should be cheering that on for Western Australia, because I'm pretty happy about that. Are you happy about that?
The Treasurer will cease interjecting.
More importantly, Speaker, the Australian public know that we care about how much money they've got in their pocket. They know that if this lot ever get to sit over here, they'll take every cent.
The member for Ryan has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. Will the Minister please update the House on the real status of the people on Nauru who are subject to regional access arrangements, and how is the government managing this issue? And is the government and the Minister aware of any alternate approaches?
The Minister for Immigration has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for her question. Mr Speaker, I can confirm to the House there are currently 635 people in Nauru, and the total number of children is 52. Transferees in Nauru have the same freedom of movement around Nauru as other local Nauruans. They are not in detention. Transfers to the United States under the resettlement agreement continue. Further transfers are expected in the coming months, and to date 439 people have been resettled by this government from Manus and Nauru to the United States, including 17 who departed this week. Now, there are 65 health professionals contracted by the Australian government to provide health services on Nauru, including 33 mental health professionals. These services are available 7 days a week and after hours. More than 200 children have been transferred from Nauru to other nations for medical reasons. Now, decisions about medical transfers are made on a case-by-case basis under the guidance of a Commonwealth medical officer.
Member for MacArthur.
We do not, Mr Speaker, we did not issue press releases or make public announcements about these transfers. And the reason these people are on Nauru, Mr Speaker, is the catastrophic failure of the Labor Party. Because it is the policies of the Labor Party, the extraordinary and catastrophic humanitarian disaster that was wrought by the Labor Party that led to people being in offshore resettlement. And we know that people smugglers haven't gone away. We know that this is a very, very dangerous group of people who are itching to get back into business. Under Labor, Mr Speaker, 50,000 people
Minister
arrived.
will just pause for a second. The member for MacArthur will cease interjecting. The minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. 50,000 people arrived illegally. It is estimated that 1,200 people drowned, and of course that number includes children. 8,000 people were placed in detention by those opposite. When we came to government, there were 2,000 children in detention. We got them all out. Those opposite opened 17 detention centres. They opened Curtin Immigration Centre. They opened Yonga Hill Immigration Detention Centre. They opened Sherga Immigration Detention. They opened Wickham Point Immigration Detention Centre. And of course they opened Christmas Island Immigration Detention Centre because of the catastrophic failure of their policies. Now, what have we done, Mr Speaker? We closed Curtin Immigration Centre. We closed Sherga Immigration Centre. We closed Northern Immigration Centre. We closed Wickham Point Immigration Centre. And you know what we did just a couple of weeks ago, Mr Speaker? We closed Christmas Island Detention Centre. And we did that because this Prime Minister and this Minister for Home Affairs stopped the boats which allowed us to get people out of detention. The record of those opposite is an appalling stain on their record. We will never repeat it. We will never allow people smugglers to get back into business, Mr Speaker.
The member for Port Adelaide.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The member for North Sydney has said, and I quote, "The challenge the government faces is that following the demise of the National Energy Guarantee, there's a strong feeling that we don't have a climate change plan." But the member for Hughes has said, and I quote, "To suggest that more people would have voted for Dave Sharma if we had passed some version of the NEG is a fantasy." Who's right when it comes to this government's policy on the National Energy Guarantee?
Prime Minister has a call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Our government will continue to pursue the plans that has ensured that we've met Kyoto 1, that we will meet Kyoto 2 and that we will meet our commitments in 2030 and the targets that have been set through the adoption of that policy some years ago. ARENA, the CEFC, Snowy 2.0, the small and large-scale REP, the Emissions Reduction Fund, which continues to be under review in terms of future support. But most of all, what we understand on this side of the House is that common sense and technology are also driving Australia to a lower emissions outcome. That is what will enable us to achieve those outcomes into the future, not by jacking up people's power prices, as those opposite wish to do, with reckless targets which will see a burden placed on households, on pensioners, on small businesses, of greater than the carbon tax they inflicted when they were last in government. Our policies are about reducing electricity prices. Our policies are achieving the emissions reduction targets, emissions reduction which has given us the lowest emissions per capita in 28 years. So we're getting on with the job, Mr Speaker. We're focusing on the issues that matter to Australians, which is equally, Mr Speaker, getting their electricity prices down and meeting our obligations to the environment. What are we getting from the Labor Party? Questions about gossip in restaurants, Mr Speaker. That's what they've been reduced to as an opposition. It doesn't get more in the bubble than that.
The member for Grey.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Senior Australians and Aged Care. Will the Minister update the House on how the government is protecting retirees and low-income earners so they can earn more and live better? And is the Minister aware of any alternative approach that would hurt self-reliant Australian retirees?
The Minister for Senior Australians and Aged Care.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Grey for his ongoing interest in this area. When we were down at UCLA and we were meeting with senior Australians, they raised a common issue. And their common issue was about what the opposition are planning to do to their retirement savings and their franking credits. And what they wanted to know was, how do I save for my future if I have an opposition that, when it comes to government, will take money from me and will dip their hands into our pockets? We're protecting self-funded retirees and senior Australians by carefully managing the economy. By managing the economy, we are building the capacity to provide services and support to Australians across a range of government services. People who have worked hard all their lives do not deserve to have their hard-earned funds ripped from their pockets. That's right. A vote for Labor is a vote for Labor's plan to raise taxes and raid retirement incomes. That's right. Do not support Labor's policy to deny refundability of franking credits. And the number of senior Australians who said they have relied on those for some of the little things that happened during the year, the replacement, the refurbishment holidays. Is that what you want to take from them? Because that's what their living is based on. This will negatively impact on 900,000 Australians, including retirees and other low-income earners, people who have planned for their future after having worked a long life contributing to their needs for the future. Under Labor's unfair retiree tax, 84% of individuals impacted on taxable incomes of less than $37,000, so it's going to impact. 40% of individuals impacted are 65 years or older. So you're wanting to hit those who are vulnerable, those whose planning and life has been based on having living years based on their hard work and their contribution. In addition, 40% of all self-managed superannuation fund members' accounts will lose their refunds. Labor's policies allow those on higher incomes to use up all of their franking credits, but denies those on lower incomes to have the ability to do the same. Almost 60,000 self-funded Australian retirees who are not yet old enough to receive the age pension would be hit by Labor's retiree tax. The Leader of the Opposition wants to slug Australians with more than $150 billion in higher taxes. So he wants to increase your taxes on your pay packet, on your home, on your electricity, on small businesses and on your investment and savings that you have put away to look after yourself in older life. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister confirm that a year ago he said, and I quote, "Evidence-based policy is the national energy guarantee. It means lower prices, more reliable energy, and we meet our obligations to the environment." I mean, why wouldn't you want that, Bill Shorten? Well, I still want that, and the Prime Minister used to want that. So why is the Prime Minister walking away from the national energy guarantee he backed last year?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The government's energy policies are about bringing down electricity prices, and the key component of what we announced today was the reliability guarantee, which forces big energy companies to contract reliable energy supply into the market, which is what keeps power prices down and keeps the lights on, Mr Speaker. That's what our policies are focused on. It's about taking the big companies to task on energy and on electricity to make sure they do the right thing, Mr Speaker, and to ensure that the big stick of legislation is there to ensure that those companies do the right thing. Now, those opposite jeer and sneer when it comes to the government taking a big stick to electricity companies, Mr Speaker. That's what they do. They don't share our view that electricity companies need to be taken to account, and by the end of this year they will have the opportunity to vote for our legislation,
The Prime Minister will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on a point of order.
Yeah, on direct relevance. My question was, the Prime Minister last year supported the National Energy Guarantee. What happened?
The Prime Minister has the call.
Mr Speaker, but what we know of the alternative, what we're doing on electricity prices to get it down, is what the Labor Party, Mr Speaker, will do, and that is to have an emissions reduction target of 45%. Now, what did Ben David, Secretary of Bill Shorten's branch of the AWU say? Sorry, I withdraw, Mr Speaker.
Just refer to the Leader of the Opposition by his correct title.
The Leader of the Labor Party's old union, his current union, the AWU, Ben David, said this: the rush away from coal and gas-fired electricity power stations is a little unseemly in its haste because we are potentially crucifying hundreds of thousands of manufacturing workers, Mr Speaker. That's what Labor's policy is about. The Business Council says the emissions target of 26% is appropriate and achievable. 45%, that's Labor's target, is an economy-wrecking target. The National Farmers Federation has expressed concern, it says, over Australian Labor Party's proposed target of 45% emissions reduction, saying it would hinder agriculture competitiveness and economic growth. The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry said Labor's newly announced proposal to double cuts to emissions to 45% by 2030 with a long-term target of zero emissions by 2050 was not backed by a credible plan that protects economic growth. But we do know who the Leader of the Labor Party is listening to. We do know who he is listening to, and that's Labor's Environment Action Network, because they said this: high prices are not a market failure, they are proof of the market working well. Now, that's what we know about the Labor Party. If you elect the Labor Party at the next election, you will pay more for everything. Your electricity, your taxes, your private health insurance, because they are their policies, Mr Speaker. Under the Liberal Party and the National Party, you'll pay less, your economy will be stronger, there'll be more jobs and your wages will be better.
The member for Forest.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Health. Will the minister update the House on how a strong economy allows the government to make medicines and private health insurance affordable? How would different approaches jeopardise this commitment to a healthy Australia?
The Minister for Health.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Forest for her question. She's been a great advocate for better access to medicines such as Orkambi for cystic fibrosis, as well as for better longer-term health studies in her own region. Recently I was privileged to announce with her an extra $1.5 million to extend the Bustleton Health Study, the longest-running health study that I'm aware of in Australia, that's been running for over 50 years. Now, she knows, though, that we can only do things such as this if there's a strong economy. And she knows this because when the Labor Party was last in government, they stopped listing medicines. When the current leader of the Labor Party, who wants to be Prime Minister of Australia, was the Assistant Treasurer of Australia, they, and I quote, deferred the listing of some medicines until fiscal circumstances permit. Until fiscal circumstances permit. So that's the person who wants to be Prime Minister, who was the Assistant Treasurer, who stopped the listing because he couldn't afford it because they couldn't take care of the economy. Now, by comparison, we have listed over 1,900 new or amended medicines on the PBS, including Illumiant. Illumiant is a medicine for rheumatoid arthritis, so for people sometimes with agonising or potentially crippling conditions. And what this medicine does is it uses the immune system to assist in overcoming this extraordinary condition. $16,500 a year of savings and 22,000 Australian patients who benefit from that $16,500 a year. So that's what you can do when you have a strong economy. It's also what we've done in terms of making sure that private health insurance is available and affordable for Australians, with the lowest change in premiums in 17 years, lower than any year when Labor was last in government. But what is interesting is that as we bring about these reforms in terms of greater access to mental health services, discounts for young people, greater access for people in rural and regional Australia, you look across the table and you think, well, who was in charge of private health and what was their attitude at the time? The Deputy Leader of the Opposition was the Health Minister, and what did she say about her time? Every promise I made, I paid for, she said when she was Health Minister. How did I pay for it? I paid for it by targeting private health insurance. So you have the Leader of the Opposition who stopped listing medicines, and you have the Deputy Leader of the Opposition who took an axe to private health insurance. And their plan right now is to drive up premiums by ripping away the rebate from senior Australians, a 16% hit. So at the end of the day, we'll protect the health of this nation, we'll protect the health of the economy, and they'll take an axe to it.
The Minister's time has concluded. The member for Ballarat has the call.
You made it easy for Josh.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. Can the minister confirm that he in fact took a year to list hepatitis C drugs, 2 years to list whooping cough vaccine and 5 years to list a lung cancer drug, and that the Health Department's own annual report shows that 1 in 8 medicines are not listed within the government's own time frame of 6 months? How can this government boast about PBS listings when it's in fact itself been delaying life-saving drugs?
The Minister for Health. Members on my left. Members on my left. The member for Deakin, the member for Goldstein. The Minister has the call.
Well, if Kerry Packer got 1 Alan Bond, I get 1 member for Ballarat. The member for Ballarat. Sorry. Freudian slip, I apologise. The member for Ballarat.
Sorry, the Minister.
The
members on my left. The Minister doesn't have the call. No, the Minister doesn't have the call. He's on mute outside this chamber at the moment. The Minister will withdraw.
I withdraw. Our commitment is to list every medicine that the PBAC recommends, that the medical experts recommend, and that's what we're doing. I note something very interesting. In terms of the lung cancer medicine to which Labor refers, Labor opposed it. They attacked the listing of this medicine, Geotrip. They criticised it, they derided it, and yet we listed it. And we went ahead and listed it because it was the right thing to do. And that is the difference between us. Even when they seek to criticise, they cannot do it properly. So let me give you some examples of what we've done. We have listed in relation to Keytruda, we've extended. In relation to Opdivo, we've extended. And we have more coming in relation to the immunotherapies. Furthermore, let me look at Spinraza, for which the Prime Minister helped bring this forward. So we are listing medicines at a faster rate.
The Minister will resume his seat. Minister will resume his seat. The Minister will resume his seat. The member for Ballarat on a point of order.
On direct relevance, I actually asked about the delays that you have had in listings that your own government's and department's annual report shows that you have a delay in 1 in 8 medicines.
The Minister for Health has the call.
In fact, what we have done is we have moved medicines forward at a faster rate than was the case under the previous government. And most significantly, let me give you the example of Spinraza and Orkambi. Spinraza for spinal muscular atrophy, listed within weeks of the PBAC approving it. And why did that happen? That happened because this Prime Minister, who in his previous role as Treasurer worked very closely with myself, the Health Department and others to ensure that we brought forward a life-saving medicine which would otherwise have been over $300,000 per year. In addition to that, Orkambi, again listed within Wicks of the PBAC announcing it, but with immediate compassionate access. So what we are doing now, on our watch, in our time, is ensuring that not only are all of the medicines of the PBAC listed, and it is a sore and sensitive point because they have been caught out, and the people who now want to be the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister of Australia were the ones who deferred the listings of medicines when they were in government and took an axe to private health insurance. So we know they are hurting. But more than that, we'll continue to do this, and we'll take pride in doing this because it is one of the most important and significant things that we will do on our watch in our time, is fix up the mess that they made last time because they couldn't manage the economy. And if you can't manage the economy, you can't manage health.
The member for Ballarat seeking to table a document.
I seek leave to table a document that shows the delays in listing that have happened under this government. 2 years for whooping cough.
Is leave granted? Leave is not granted. The member for Murray.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Human Services and Digital Transformation. Will the Minister update the House on the steps the government is taking to support our farmers through the drought, including by implementing new initiatives to ensuring farmers can access the essential services they require conveniently and quickly?
The Minister for Human Services.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Murray for his question. And I also acknowledge that he is passionate about helping people in his electorate who have been affected by the drought. And he knows that this government will continue to do all that we can to affect drought-affected farmers in particular all across Australia. Now, in the absence of rain, we must do all we can to keep rural towns alive and to help farmers through what is a very difficult time. As a result of the commitments already made by this government, direct assistance and concessional loans to aid drought-stricken farmers is increasing to $1.8 billion.
Member for Eden-Monaro.
Through my own department, the Department of Human Services, we're increasing support to farmers on the ground when and where they need it by nearly doubling the amount of staff processing farm household allowance claims, which means that people will get timely decisions when they need assistance. We're also opening the doors of our service centres for longer, which will also assist farmers. Last weekend, the Bathurst, Bundaberg and Kingaroy service centres in the electorates of Clare, Hinkler and Maranoa opened their doors on Saturday to provide extra support to farmers in these severely drought-affected regions. This weekend, the Shepparton Service Centre in the electorate of Murray will open on Saturday as well. Specialist staff from my department will be on hand to provide farmers with personalised assistance to complete their farm household allowance claim forms and connect them with other services that they might be eligible to access. We know that support at convenient times is essential to farmers who are struggling. We are providing specialised farm household case officers and a rural financial counsellor who will be able to offer free financial counselling and business advice to anyone who needs it. It's absolutely vital that farmers have a strong understanding of the assistance that is available to them, and given that farmers often have complicated financial affairs, that we do what we can to help them through the process. We've recently simplified and improved the farm household allowance to make it easier for people to apply. We've cut the size of the form by a third, making it 5 pages shorter. We've also enabled online application through MyGov, which allows people to keep in touch with my department and upload forms and important documents without the need to call into a service centre or to phone one of our call centres. Our government has been able to deliver these things, Mr Speaker, due to prudent economic management, and we will continue to do all that we can to assist our farmers in drought-affected areas.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.
I thank the Prime Minister. The Leader of the House with papers.